From the center of the universe, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, this is the SDM Show with your host, Rob Cairns. The SDM Show focuses on business, life, productivity, digital marketing, WordPress, and more. Sit back, relax, grab your favorite drink, and enjoy the show. Here is Rob.
Hey everybody, Rob Cairns here. I'm the founder, CEO, and chief creator of Amazing Ideas at Stunning Digital Marketing. In today's podcast, Ryan Waterbury and I sit down and have our monthly discussion on how to help agencies. In today's episode, we talk security. So grab a drink, sit back and relax, and enjoy the conversation. This episode of the SDM Show is sponsored by Stunning Digital Marketing, the agency to handle all your WordPress website security needs. Go on over to stunningdigitalmarketing.com and find out how we can help you secure your website so you no longer have an issue with backups, being hacked, or your website being compromised. That's stunningdigitalmarketing.com. Hey everybody, Rob Cairns here. Today I'm here with Ryan Waterbury and we're going to talk all things security. How are you today, Ryan?
I'm not doing too bad.
Yeah, I thought this month we'd talk about security and we'll probably end up touching on privacy a little bit. But first I wanted to sort of touch on security in general. And we all know the weak link is passwords. So are you still seeing a lot with passwords where people are using passwords that they should never use?
Yeah, a little bit. It really depends. Had a recent discussion on, what to use for passwords. And, a lot of the password generators, put out the string of 32 characters that are odd and randomized that you can never remember. Mm-hmm. So, I've talked to a lot of people, and some people are good about it and some people aren't, but get a password manager and then use those long string character passwords. That way you have to remember one and make sure it's a good one. And then you're set.
Which is your password manager choice these days, Ryan?
For me personally, I've been using Bitwarden. Mm-hmm. LastPass is good. 1Password actually is one that I have a couple of clients using that are really happy with it. Yep. But honestly, they're all pretty good. Those are probably my top three. But just get one and use it. And it saves so much time, and it ensures that you're using secure passwords. You don't have to remember those unique passwords for every site, and then you're done. It's a lot of security and a lot of ease all in one shot.
I would agree with you. I'm also a Bitwarden user, have been for a couple of years. Before that, I used LastPass. I made a switch, and it wasn't a money switch. It was a functionality switch, so that's why I did that. I find Bitwarden on a mobile phone works really well, actually. So I think it's a little better than LastPass. But yeah, it's the old story. It's the one that you use and know well that I think you do really well with. And that's my response. Get a password manager if you can't remember. And I actually use Bitwarden to generate my passwords. So I can't even tell you beyond my email password and my password for Bitwarden. Don't ask me what any of them are, if you can believe that. So, do you have a thought while we're talking passwords of using two-step authentication, and where do you stand with that?
So I like two-factor authentication, and I think it's great. There are a lot of tools out there, a lot of sites that work with Google's key generator. It's a nice tool to use. Even just getting an email with a code for two-factor is great. I think that's another security step that you have to have in place. And if you're not using two-factor, there's another hole. Getting text messages, some will argue that they can be intercepted. It's a low likelihood, but it's possible. But just using two-factor in general ensures that if your password is ever compromised, that you have that extra layer of security, that you have to have that code generated from the app to log into whatever site you're logging into.
I'm in the camp where I actually argue that if I can avoid text messaging for my second factor, don't do it. But it's really interesting because my bank only does text messaging. The government of Canada only does text messaging. And it's like, guys, like, give us an option here. I tend to lean towards, and I might have told you this, I lean towards, I use an YubiKey. I don't even use an authenticator app. Now, the only thing is, if you're going to go to a smart key, make sure you purchase a couple of them, because if you lose your smart key, you're SOL without a leg to stand on. I mean, there's some really good apps. Google has one. Microsoft has one. There's several of them. So I would say choose one and give yourself a fighting chance, right, Ryan?
Oh, exactly. I mean, Google's is free, open source to use. And I mean, as much hate as we put on Google, they've done a lot of really good things for security. And one of them was their authenticator app. One of the other ones is their push for secure internet and keeping TLS or SSL certs up to date. So I got to give them a little kudos there.
No, I would agree. I'm not in the Google hater department. You just have to understand what they do and how they do it. And as we're talking like small businesses, and I think one of the biggest things that we should talk about is small businesses don't do backups enough. And I just see it all the time. And one of the things I always say to a small business is, if you're not going to do manual backups, go get yourselves a service to do it that runs in the background, does it for you, and then you don't have to think about it. Thoughts?
It's kind of funny that you said they aren't very good about it. Well, some of them don't do it at all. And they don't realize that they need to do it. So I saw a quote that said, "Hey, if you're making a backup, you are preparing to fail." Well, no, you're preparing for the worst case scenario. And it's not just a security thing. I've fudged data and broken things and said, oops, I should probably restore from my backup. And there again, I'm, on the Google policy of the 3-2-1 policy, 3 copies of my backup data in at least 2 different locations.
Yep.
So for my servers, I have a copy in the cloud, and I also have a backup copy on a local RAID attached to my file server. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, and the online service I really like these days is a service called iDrive, which is well known. But it's not just about getting hacked. It's about mechanical failure. I tell the story a lot. I was in the hospital for 3 weeks 13 years ago with a diabetic crash. I came home. I turned on my desktop that hadn't been on for 2.5 weeks, and all I heard was ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk. And for those who don't know, that's the sound of a spinning hard drive saying it hates you. So, we do have failures, so backups are really important. And then the last kind of thing I want to touch on quickly, and I just went through it with a client, please don't let the Microsoft guy into your computer. No matter how much they call and say, oh, we're from Microsoft. Microsoft doesn't call people. Computer companies don't call people for help. Don't let them in, because before you know it, you're going to have malware, and the cost of that is going to be excruciating.
And guess what? They also don't email you. So that's another one that people aren't aware of. When you get text messages, you get emails, you don't know who it's from, don't open it. Don't click on the attachment.
Don't
because
click
it's
on the link. No.
If you are not absolutely sure that the email is from a trusted source, then don't open it. Delete it.
And if you're concerned that your password has been hacked, there's a really good website out there called If You've Been Pawned. And if you put your email address in, it will tell you where your email's showing up and what where it's been compromised. So that's worth taking a look at as well. It's a really good site. Let's jump on to WordPress security, because you and I both spend a lot of time in the website world, way too much. And as you know, security is a big forte to what I do and a big part of what you do. What's your take on website security? Do people do enough?
There's not anything that's perfectly secure. There are steps that we can take to prevent and mitigate hacking, malware attempts, and breaks. So I myself manage the servers that I do hosting for my clients. So security for me starts at the server level, and that's first and foremost. Making sure that your host is doing server level security and locking as much down as possible. That's number one. Find yourself a good hosting partner. Number two, I don't like to say securing WordPress. I mean, we talk about hardening it and making it harder for people to access. There are a number of things that go into that. One, security through obscurity. I usually move the login page because that gets hit. wp-login.php gets hit so hard by bot scanners, and some people will tell me that that's ludicrous. They can still break into the login page, but I can tell you from experience that the break attempts go down by a factor of 9 when we move the login page. Like simple things like that. But making sure that your SSL certificate is up to date. And it making sure that you're running a web application firewall. We do that at the server level for each of our web applications. Although the plugins from Jeff Starr, BBQ, the NG firewalls are awesome. He does a great job with keeping those updated to block common queries. iThemes uses parts of that in their security tool set. I think you're an iThemes fan as well.
I'm in more with these days with iThemes and PatchStack. That's kind of
right.
And a lot of that's a trust level. There's a certain security company whose name I will not mention on this podcast because it is well known that I have a big distaste for, and due to multiple reasons, which I'll save for another day. But I think a lot of security is based on who you trust, where you get your support. I think some simple things that really help is keeping your website up to date. That hardens it a little bit. And I should have touched on this earlier when we talked backups in the regular world, but I'll touch on it now. If you're taking backups, do a restore once in a while to a dummy site and actually make sure they work. I mean, I find a lot of people say, I have a backup, and I say, really? Do you? Does it work?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that we go through annually and test every single backup. Mm-hmm. And then we test our process quarterly to make sure that the backup from the web application works. We use Updraft Plus and put that on our local storage as well as on Google Cloud to make sure that it restores from both locations and the application works when it's up. We also take a hosting level backup daily, and we do a restore from there and make sure that that works when it comes back up. Your backups are worthless if you can't restore from them.
Yeah, and the other big suggestion I always had to people, and people say I'm crazy in other agencies, I keep 3 months of backups 3 days a week offline. And the answer is, why do you do that? I have seen over the years, time and time again, a piece of malware that gets injected, and it sits there for 2 months before the payload is invoked. I have seen it happen over and over and over again.
Right. Yeah, and so I keep backups daily, full backups for 46 days. And then we'll do incremental backups to touch back past that at 60, 180, and that's as far back as we're usually keeping our Updraft Plus backups. But it's cheap CYA. Storage isn't as expensive as it used to be. And if you're not keeping backups as long as you possibly and reasonably economically can, you're asking for trouble, in my opinion.
No, I so heartedly agree with that. And then let's go back to 2FA. What do you think about 2FA on websites?
I think two-factor authentication is a great way to secure your website, especially if you're doing e-commerce and you have a lot of users logging in. I don't do it on all my sites, but the ones that see a lot more traffic, generally we'll have the discussion with the client, and it really depends on their feelings. I recommend it, but I don't require it. I think doing some of the other security hardening, you're already in a good step. But at some point, I don't think we're going to be able to avoid two-factor authentication on every single WordPress website.
No, I would agree. And frankly, it's funny. You talk to the WordPress haters out there, and they say WordPress is insecure. And I would disagree with that. I would say it has to do with a trust factor. So you're saying you don't trust the WordPress ecosystem. That's different. And my argument always is Microsoft, which is the biggest operating system in the world, they patch security holes every month. And I would rather software manufacturers, those are people that make themes and make plugins and all that stuff, take a reasonable patching their software and care about their users, because I don't think you can avoid vulnerabilities anymore.
So WordPress got a bad rap for security because a lot of users that wanted to do cheap DIY route and over the years, and this really isn't the case anymore, but a lot of them thought it was a set it and forget it kind of deal. Yep. Where, I use a trusted stack of plugins that I know are in active development, and we keep our plugins updated because there are security holes that pop up, and good developers close them and push out an update, and they alert their clients that there's a security problem and that you should update. Yeah. Why WordPress got a bad rap? people didn't log into their websites. They didn't update to close those security holes. So there were exploits. And so WordPress as a whole, core, the number of security holes that have been patched has gone down over the past couple of years considerably. It's from a core standpoint, it's gotten very secure. It's the plugin developers that are catching up these days, and this kind of goes back to 2020, where people had a lot of time to spend to try and find exploits and vulnerabilities because they had the time to do it.
Which also means the hackers have more time on their hands, and we're seeing an increase in attacks because of COVID. We're seeing an increase of attacks because of what's going on in the Ukraine, and it's a never-ending battle. If you know where I'm coming from, right? So,
yeah, security never stops, and it's you think about your phone. And, I kind of talked about the lack of updates where your phone gets updates in the background all the time.
Yep.
And you know what? You pay for the service, and that's part of the service where, I talked about WordPress being DIY. Well, you're the service. You're responsible for hitting the update button and managing those updates. So, that's kind of where the bad rap came in. And if you're not comfortable with performing updates, again, there's what we call managed hosting or web care, which you and I both offer, where we can still have that awesome custom website, but we manage that security and those updates for our clients to make sure that they're not going to get hacked.
Yeah,
that we have multiple levels of backups in case they make a mistake and break their site. It happens.
And the reality of it all is, I've seen it too much. I was sharing with you a story a couple of weeks ago where I picked up a new client, logged into the dashboard, 59 plugins, which is way too much for my liking, 10 being used, and then how many of the ones not being used were not updated? All of them. And that's just a recipe for disaster, because the reality is clients don't log into their dashboard. And, when clients don't log into their dashboard, you're going to have that problem because, frankly, clients don't have time. They're not in the business of website maintenance. They're in the business of running their business. And that's what they forget. And they try and DIY everything. And then when they get caught, it's, oh, well, I didn't know. Now, one of the options is with WordPress now is you can turn on automatic plugin updates, but I'm not a big fan of that either because I like to have a backup before I do an update. I don't want one just to kind of go, if you know what I mean.
Oh, exactly. I mean, that's the beauty of WordPress and the wonderful platform that we work with is that it's immensely flexible. And because it's immensely flexible, themes and more so plugins now have, commoditized some of the development that one plugin may cause a conflict with another one and your site may stop working if you just randomly update and leave those updates turned on. I don't mean to throw a big scare out there, but that's also why we do incremental updates before, incremental backups before we run an update, simply for the fact that we test most of our updates in a staging environment, and when things look good, we update on live. Sometimes there are things that you don't catch, and turning on auto updates without allowing that auto incremental backup before you do it, that's a recipe for disaster.
No, there's no question. And I think one of the things, and I know I jump on them pretty quick, when a WordPress, what we call a core update, so that's a WordPress version, not so much a plugin theme, I pretty well jump on those, especially if there's security in the update, because the minute the update comes out, then the security fix or issue is out in the wild, and that just leaves you vulnerable. And I'm not a big fan of that.
Yeah, we're at 5.9.3 right now. Mm-hmm. The .1, .2, and .3 updates. I took a brief look at the security notes, updated my site, and I run the same stack on my site as I do most of my client sites. Make sure that everything works and nothing's broken. And usually those are security updates, so you want to get them out as soon as possible.
No,
the full updates, like 6.0 is coming out soon. When it introduces new features, that's where you want to step back and do some testing before you roll that baby out.
Yeah, I usually roll those babies out a little faster than most people, but I'm also, I think, more in tune with some of what's going on than most people. So I think you got to do it as a comfort level on what works for you and what doesn't. I also think we got to be really careful with certain issues. Like we went through the freemium problem a couple months ago, and that was 500 or so plugins because they all use the same SDK. I know when Elementor typically has problems, it usually impacts their whole library because they all use the same backend library. Things like that actually concern me more than not, because then somebody's not going to update necessarily a backend library, and that's a bit of an issue.
Yeah, that's when it becomes a problem. When, and that's when you're developing, you want to really step back and think about when you're writing your software, especially when you're looking at library dependencies. Not just like the freemium is a nice. I used to think about it as a nice marketplace, to look at premium plugins. But the hole that they had in their development kit, just a lot of the plugin authors they weren't snappy with getting things updated, and there are still some that aren't updated after, how long has that been out? 2 months? 3 months?
Months, and I think they're still at they still have around 200 of those plugins have not been patched. I think it's that high. So
I talked about using a stack of plugins, and I usually use my agency site to test out. First off, I make sure that when I look at different toolkits and plugin authors out there, that they're going to maintain active development. It's a healthy company. They have good development practices, that their code is clean, and they come out with regular updates. So choosing your software stack also has a little bit to do with, your security and knowing that the code's going to be maintained going forward.
Yeah. And the other thing I would suggest is, if you have an interest in security, jump on some of the security newsletters from some of the different vendors. I think iThemes is one of the most comprehensive ones out there as well. I know I spend time reading WP Scan usually quite a bit because Automatic owns them and they're pretty in tune. I tend to read the Patch Stack newsletter. There's a couple others out there, and I would read those more than I would read. And I know places like Search Engine Journal like to publish the odd security article, but I wouldn't waste my time on Search Engine Journal. Is not a security company.
No, and it's a different market. But the first one you touched on, the iThemes newsletter, I think that's a really good one for everyday users, DIY users to get on, because they do a weekly roundup. And it was last summer, I think, in their July issue where June or July, when they started going from a monthly to a bi-weekly to a weekly, because they had like 70 some vulnerabilities that they had reported, and it was the highest that they had ever seen. So they now do a weekly report, and some of the ones are the same that hit the weekly report, but there's a lot of different ones. And I think as a DIY user, it's a quick scan to go down the list and just say, do I use any of these plugins?
Yeah,
it's a little bit of...
As you know, it's one of my favorite sources, and I go down that list and say, do I use any of those plugins every Wednesday? So like to me, it's a must read. It's not the only read, but I think it's a really good one.
And the looking at different sources for security advice is always a plus. You can't just look at one source because different security people look at different aspects of the ecosystem when we talk about WordPress. Mm-hmm. And I think it's good to keep your ear to the ground. That's one of the highlights that I like to talk about in my bi-weekly newsletter. I have a security slot in there and talk about any major vulnerabilities. This last week, it was the Elementor one because it affects so many people. It's just such a wildly popular plugin. Just getting your information from trusted sources and not just one is.
I agree. I don't know how much to say. Don't use just one source because you get pigeonholed, and I think multiple sources is actually better for you, not worse. And frankly, spend some time paying attention to some of the real sources, not just the people who kind of fly off the handle every time something goes wrong, but there's all kinds of people out there to help you and will get back to you. And several, if you don't want to do what you've done and build something, there's several security companies, including PatchStack, that actually have free plans to get you started. I think, if I recall right, PatchStack's free plan is up to 100 sites. So, if you got a couple sites, you might want to look into stuff like that and just and give yourself a bit of a fighting chance. Because I've had a saying for years, it's not if you'll ever be hacked, it's when, where, how, and how do you recover from that hack attempt. I think.
I think it's probably half a dozen of my web care clients over the past year have been referrals that one of my clients had somebody reach out, who takes care of your website? It's always up and it works. Mine's not working and doing stuff.
Yep.
Those sites that I take over, have malware. They're out of date. And it's just kind of surprising. Well, I mean, it doesn't surprise me. And now seeing some of the things that I've seen. Yeah. But it's a matter of when. And I think we've all had to deal with it. We try and mitigate it. But you and I are in better positions because I think one piece of malware that stuck onto my agency site, I was able to roll back when I was aware of it the next day with an alert from a security group and rolled the backup, spotted and did the spot check for any files and did a few scans and made sure things were clean. But yeah, I mean, it even happens to us.
Touch wood, I haven't had a piece of malware on my agency site in probably 5 years. And now that I've said it, you know what's going to happen. So, it's like, why did I go there? But I do want to stress, and it's something you said earlier, your hosting company is your partner in this. And I give an example. I used to be involved with the Ontario Police Memorial Foundation in Toronto. And every time that ceremony goes on, it's a ceremony where they honor fallen police officers. I watched the website during the ceremony, and I watched not the front end of the site. I'm watching tools to watch the back end of the site. Last time I was involved, which was a couple of years ago, that WordPress blog that they used to live stream the site took over 20,000 bot attacks in an hour. And if your hosting company's not your partner in it all, your site's not staying up. It's very simple.
Oh yeah, if you're not prepared to handle that level of attack, you haven't found yourself a good hosting partner. And I mean, even good hosting partners will can potentially struggle with attacks of that magnitude, because that's a big shot at one time.
Yeah, and that's a targeted shot because the ceremony is going on. It's not what we typically see where bots are crawling the internet trying to find something. This is more a, let's go after this because this is going on. And I've seen that over and over and over where an event happens and you get a massive target. So it's something people need to be aware of as well.
Oh, exactly. Hackers are looking for a time to exploit when they think they can get in unnoticed.
Yep.
And that's it's convenient for them. And, we've talked about this at WordPress meetups. Why do they want to hack your site? Well, a lot of them need the processing power, and they want to use your site to transmit messages and relay. They might want your IP because it's clean, and they can get into other sites where they can monetize it. There are all multitude of reasons, but there's not a good time, to get hacked, but it's always when you're not looking.
Yeah. This has been really some good advice. I hope some people listen to this and really start to understand. I know I've been beating this drum like a broken record for the last 2 years, I think. And sometimes somebody says again, and I said, well, if people start getting the message, I wouldn't have to beat the drum and you wouldn't either. And, it might make life a little more simpler, but I don't know. And that's just the nature of the beast. There would be something else down the road if this wasn't working. So thanks for joining me today, Ryan. If somebody wants to get a hold of you, how's the best way?
On all major social media platforms at OneDog Solutions is a good way. I'm probably most active on Twitter these days. If you want to check out my website, it's onedog.solutions, and you can email me at ryan.waterbury@onedog.solutions.
Thanks, Ryan. Have a great day.
You too.
This episode of the SDM Show is sponsored by Stunning Digital Marketing, the agency to handle all your WordPress website security needs. Go on over to stunningdigitalmarketing.com and find out how we can help you secure your website so you no longer have an issue with backups, being hacked, or your website being compromised. That's stunningdigitalmarketing.com. A very special thank you to Ryan for joining me on this edition of the SDM Show. Thank you for listening to this edition of the SDM Show. The SDM Show is brought to you by Rob Cairns and Stunning Digital Marketing. For more information about Rob Cairns and Stunning Digital Marketing, go to stunningdigitalmarketing.info. From here, you can connect to us on social media, go to our website, and even go to the podcast to subscribe. This podcast is dedicated to my late father, Bruce Cairns. Dad, I miss you very much. Keep your feet on the ground. Keep reaching for the stars. Make your business succeed.